Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Naruto Shippuden, Ultimate Ninja Storm Revolution for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. What you're seeing here is the PC version. This is a 3D fighting game developed by CyberConnect 2 and published by Bandai Namco Games in 2014 for all three systems, and it was the first game in the series to be developed right from the beginning as a co-release on PC and console. The previous game in the series, Ultimate Ninja Storm 3, didn't see a PC release until they re-released the game as Full Burst, which had the DLC included. This raises a couple of questions. First off, how is this as a sequel to Ultimate Ninja Storm 3 Full Burst? Because it does take a pretty different direction and goes off in a completely non-canon route. And second, how is the PC port of this game? Because the PC port of the previous game was really not very good at all. Well, let's go ahead and delve into this thing and find out. Well, as far as presentation goes, this game looks almost exactly the same as the previous Ultimate Ninja Storm game, which was Full Burst, because it actually reuses pretty much all of the same assets. 3D models, animations, textures, even the backgrounds, all are pretty much directly ripped from Ultimate Ninja Storm 3 Full Burst, with a few thrown in extra for good measure. The engine is exactly the same, and it's all coded exactly the same, which means that this is not a very good PC port either. If you saw my note at the beginning there where I was making note of why this video isn't in 60 frames a second, it's because the game is locked at 30 frames a second. Now, it's really not uncommon to have fighting games with locked frame rates because they want to make sure that everything is timed perfectly for it, but 30 frames a second is a very console way of doing things. The thing is that while this is really annoying for a PC gamer who's used to higher frame rates, and especially one who's running a very high refresh rate monitor like myself, where it's really noticeable that the game is running at 30 frames a second, because the entire game and all of the frame timings were built around 30 frames per second, it means that it's not an insufferable game to play. It's just another instance of console game development holding the PC version back, although it's not just in the frame rate, it's also in the actual visuals. If you don't enable super sampling when you set up the options for this game, then you're going to find that there are a lot of jagged edges on everything, and it ends up looking like there's no anti-aliasing at all. The thing as well is that super sampling can be confusing to most gamers because that means you upscale the resolution, and super sampling 2x means that you are super sampling the resolution by 2 times. So to give you an example, my monitor is a 1080p monitor, so super sampling that theoretically would be running the resolution in 2K. That might scare some people into thinking, well, if I leave super sampling on, it means the game will run like crap. It doesn't, actually. As far as I can tell, for pretty much everybody who would be playing this game on PC, it's going to run just fine. Of course, fine in this case means running locked at 30 frames per second, so that's not exactly a high bar to clear. Of course, even with super sampling enabled, the game's sprites still render at sub 1080p. In fact, I think they're around 720p or sometimes even less than that, which means that they look very pixelated on the higher resolutions. Why they stuck with 720p or less for the sprite quality, I have absolutely no idea, but that's what they did. All of this put together means that this looks like a console port and it runs like a console port, except that at least it runs smoothly. It's not one of those console ports where you're getting a lot of speed up, speed down nonsense. It's a constant 30 frames a second as opposed to a fluctuating one. Of course, once you go within those limitations, you do find that this is an anime-style game with a sort of cel-shaded aesthetic, which means that it actually looks pretty fitting for the source material, and as far as the actual graphics go, they can get away more with it not being as high quality. So while it is a bit disappointing that the graphics aren't better quality, at least the aesthetics help make up for this. The sound design, on the other hand, doesn't really have very many mitigating factors associated with it. Pretty much all of the sound effects and even most of the voice clips are ripped directly from Ultimate Ninja Storm 3 Full Burst. And while they're certainly fitting for the source material, being sound effects that are pretty much ripped directly from the anime, you've got the problem of them really not being all that great. There's just not a lot of oomph behind most of the sound effects, and even the explosion sounds really are not all that beefy, which means that the impact of the fighting is a bit low. Then of course there's the music, which is utterly forgettable, although it is somewhat inspired by the anime, so at least they're going for somewhat of consistency there. But what really just drags the game down or elevates it to some degree, depending on which one you're actually using, is the voice acting. What do I mean by that particular condition? Well, I mean that there are two different sets of voices in this game. There's the English voice acting and the Japanese voice acting. Do not, under any circumstances, play this game with the English voice acting. The English voice acting in Naruto is terrible. It's very flat and lifeless. To give you a prime example, when they're chaining off their super powerful attacks in the Japanese voice acting, they're pretty much screaming it, meaning there's some sense of excitement around it, but in the English voice acting, it'd be more like, Planetary Rasengan. There's no sense of urgency to it, and even when they're not saying things like the attacks, the voice acting ends up just being really cheesy in English and just sounds bad. So just put the voices over to Japanese and just roll with it. Because at least those voice actors actually sound interested in what they're saying. You simply can't say the same about the English voiceovers, which is the same problem with the anime as well, so that doesn't really surprise me. But when you put everything together, it means that most of the presentation is fitting for the source material, but it's mostly technical issues and of course the problems with the English voice acting that drag it down. But of course what really matter here are the story, or rather lack thereof in this game, and the gameplay. Now the story in this does not follow the same tropes as the previous game in the series or the following game in the series. It is a completely non-canon title. The only thing that resembles canon is the 3 side stories that sort of fill in some gaps in the lore. And for those particular stories, they actually did get the studio behind the anime to do some actual video for them, so they're at least to the same quality standards of the anime, which unfortunately are not very high, but whatever, at least they're consistent. The problem is that only 2 of those actually have gameplay, and all 3 of them really are not very long at all. They're maybe 15-20 minutes at most. This means that the vast majority of the game and its story mode consists of the Ninja World Tournament and Mecha Naruto story. Now the story of the Ninja World Tournament is as follows. All the ninja from all the eras are gathering to find out who is the very best like no one ever was. The sad part is I wish I made that up, but I didn't. That is the actual story of the Ninja World Tournament. It's just incredibly idiotic. If you're going to do something like that, make the Ninja World Tournament a mode rather than the actual story mode, and just do a completely non-canon storyline as your actual story, which is sort of what they did with the Mecha Naruto story, where Naruto and Hinata find a robot on the festival island where the tournament is taking place, and they bring it back with them and all sorts of shenanigans ensue. The operating word I would use for the Mecha Naruto storyline is incredibly stupid. I know that's 2 words, but I don't care. It tries to be funny, but fails miserably at it. It doesn't make any sense at all. Obviously it's non-canon, so you can disregard it entirely, and on top of all of this, it's really short. As in, I'm pretty sure I finished it in under 2 hours. The Ninja World Tournament mode is really not much better. You finish that in roughly the span of an hour, maybe 2 at most for a single playthrough. The idea is that you play through it multiple times at higher difficulty settings in order to get new characters and things like that. But it doesn't shake the fact that there is almost no story content in this game whatsoever. By the time I hit 5 hours into the game, I had experienced every single bit of story content. The only things left after that were gameplay related. Of course, finishing the rest of the Ninja World Tournament, which is literally just the same storyline repeated over and over again at higher difficulty settings, and of course the free battle and online modes. We'll start with the Ninja World Tournament mode because it is the most involved out of all of them. You start the mode by selecting a character that you'll play throughout that particular run, and then you are inducted into the Ninja World Tournament at the very beginning in D rank, and you move all the way up through C, B, A, and S ranks. Every time you finish one of the rank circuits, then you have to start the entire thing over again. You can select an entirely new character, and you can play again on the new rank. It's just up to you as to whether or not you want to go on that rank or not. Now, the primary fighting mode when you're actually playing the Ninja World Tournament is the Orb Battle mode, which is basically just do as much damage as you possibly can to the other players. That way you eventually get more orbs than they do, and if you have the most orbs by the end of it, you win. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, it is simple in theory, but in practice it ends up being a chaotic mess because the gameplay of the Ultimate Ninja Storm series was never actually built around 4 players. The way the movement and targeting works, it just does not work well when you have 4 players thrown into the mix, and when you throw in the additional elements of the rails where you can hop on a rail in order to do extra damage to an enemy while moving really quickly away from the battle, as well as the special orbs that spawn in the middle of the fight and allow you to get access to the ultimate jutsu or the awakening ability, it just makes the orb battles more frustrating than anything else. It's one of those things where you can see the potential that that particular mode has if they designed the game around it, but since they didn't design the game around it, then it actually makes it more of a tacked-on mode than anything else, and with it being pretty much a tacked-on mode, it makes it really annoying that it's the primary focus of the main story content. Because the primary gameplay style that they were going for was a one-on-one sort of fight, but it was in the sort of Marvel vs. Capcom style where you had a team of up to 3 characters that you can deal with. That sort of thing is just thrown away in the orb battle mode for something that just doesn't work very well, and when the actual primary gameplay style is relegated to side content, it makes it a bit confusing, and more importantly, it makes the whole gameplay experience really not all that great. Because all the interesting content in the Ninja World Tournament mode is the side content where you have to go and get ally quests done, where they'll have various objectives, most of which involve you fighting those particular characters in a normal actual fight, as opposed to the orb battle crap. There are other parameters that you might run into as well, things like timing you to get to a certain location and then complete a fight, or complete several fights and get to the end point, or any number of things like that. Which of course does help to break up the monotony of the Ninja World Tournament mode, but unfortunately the primary mode is still the orb battle mode, and orb battles are just awful in this game. It's an idea that was probably a decent idea on paper, but in practice it just doesn't work. And the entire Ninja World Tournament mode suffers as a result. This means that you primarily rely on the free battle and online modes, which is unfortunate because the online is completely dead at this point. I could not find a single game when I tried to play this thing online, and even more fun than that, I've actually read reports that the microphone is always on when you play online, so that gets pretty annoying too. That's another hallmark of a badly done, or at the very least just lazily done PC port, so it becomes kind of painfully obvious that this game was rushed out the door on PC. Although the entirety of the game really does make it feel like it was rushed out in general just to make a quick buck on the license before they moved on to Ultimate Ninja Storm 4. And the simple reason for that is there's really not much meat to this game. Nearly everything in the game was ripped directly from Ultimate Ninja Storm 3 Full Burst, and there weren't really all that many tweaks to the formula. They did mess around with the actual gameplay mechanics a bit. You have the Ultimate Jutsu type, the Awakening type, and the Drive type, which is just alternate methods to play the characters, where Ultimate Jutsu is what you're used to if you've played previous games in the series, where it just plays out and you have a particularly powerful jutsu you can use if you expend a large amount of your chakra meter, or if you manage to build up a special meter during the course of the game. It's a particularly high damage attack that is extremely flashy and over the top, and of course it's one of those things where you go on rule of cool and not much more than that. But let's face it, quite a few of those are in fact very cool. But I digress. There's also the Awakening type, where you can build up your energy in order to enter an awakened state, and then eventually a true awakened state, where you do considerably more damage, you're faster, you're actually a little bit more resilient to damage, that sort of thing. And then of course there's the Drive type, which is only available if you're playing team battles, which means that if you play a team battle and you select the Drive type, you will be relying pretty much entirely on your support characters. Because that's basically what the Drive type does. It enhances your support character abilities that normally are not all that powerful. It's an interesting idea, but as far as I'm concerned, the Awakening and Drive types are really not all that great. You can certainly win fights with the Awakening type, but I don't recall a single Drive type fight where I actually lost. It was kind of sad, actually, because I'm really not very good at fighting games, and I was absolutely demolishing anything that was a Drive type in this. Plus, when I actually went to play that particular type myself, I absolutely despised it, so that's why you don't see any footage of me actually playing a Drive type. You only see me fighting against it. The Awakening type really isn't all that great either, though, because you don't get the over-the-top flashy superpower, but you also don't really get all that much of a boost when you enter the Awakened mode. Sure, it does enhance your character's damage output and damage resilience, but when you get down to it, it's not really that much of an increase, and it ends up being kind of a worthless mode. Now, I'm sure that there are quite a few people out there who have managed to make Awaken type and Drive type work for them, but I'd rather just stick to the Ultimate Jutsu type, to be perfectly honest. Not only is it more familiar and more intuitive than the other two types, but it's what the game was really designed around. It's supposed to be over the top and flashy, and that's precisely what the Ultimate Jutsu type is. The other two types are the kind of things you would find in a more competitive fighting game, and that's not something that the Ultimate Ninja Storm series remotely excels at. In fact, it's absolutely terrible at it. The roster is simply not balanced. There are certain characters that are just blatantly more powerful than others or blatantly just weaker than others, and so they almost never get used. Whereas the ridiculously powerful characters get used all the time. Throwing in the two extra types does throw a bit of a monkey wrench into the works and does require you to adapt a bit, but for the most part it's a very simple adaptation because this game is really not a complex fighting game in the slightest. Much like the previous game, you have a single button for attacks, you have a button for chakra loading, which then you can use to either press with the attack button to do a jutsu, press with the dash button, which allows you to do a supercharged dash, or press with the projectile button to do a supercharged projectile. You have 4 slots for various tools that are mapped to the D-pad on a controller, and these are things like various debuffs that you can apply to an opponent, or various special attacks you can do, or even some buffs that you can put onto yourself. There's a button for blocking that, if you use in conjunction with the analog stick, allows you to dash around, and of course there is also a button to switch in and out with characters. Although it's not so much a button as the right analog stick that you flick left or right depending on which character you want to switch over to. There's also a button to do a substitution jutsu, which is colloquially referred to as logging, where you just suddenly spawn a log where you were before and you pop up behind the enemy. You have a limited meter for being able to do that, so you can't just log indefinitely and avoid taking damage without any repercussions. This means that while there is some degree of skill involved, this is still a very casual fighting game that is made to be more flashy than anything else, and in that particular regard it does somewhat succeed. The problem is that there's really not enough that's different from Ultimate Storm 3 Full Burst to warrant getting this particular game as opposed to Ultimate Ninja Storm 4. The Ninja World Tournament mode is just not very good, and the Mecha Naruto storyline is downright idiotic. So when you combine that with the fact that most of the characters in this game return from the previous game, even though it does have over 100 characters to choose from, and you combine that with the fact that the online for this game is pretty much dead at this point, it means that there's really no reason to pick this up over Ultimate Ninja Storm 3 Full Burst, or especially Ultimate Ninja Storm 4. Because even though those games do follow the storyline of the manga, and especially the anime, they actually do have a proper story mode, and there's more on offer there. And comparing those two games to this one, it's basically like night and day. This was pretty much a side game that they decided to charge full price for. And if you can get it on a really deep discount, then you might be able to get something out of it, but it's only for the people who are pretty much die-hard fans of the Ultimate Ninja Storm series anyway. For the rest of us, it's a rather underwhelming experience. Thus, I give it a 2.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching.